Hello, Atticus authors. Welcome to our webinar all about using alt text in Atticus. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that during this particular webinar, I will not be available to interact in the comments. This will be something that goes available for replay to everyone who could not attend live. So there won't be interaction between me and the comment section. But if anyone has questions after the event, whether you are watching the live version or the replay, please always feel free to write into support@atticus.io with any questions that you come up with. So I don't want to take up much of your time. I want to be sure we get right down to business. If we have not met before, my name is Monique Danielle. I'm the educational content curator for Atticus, as well as the customer success team member. And today we're going to be talking all about alt text. So I'm just going to dive right in and get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation. All right. So we're going to talk today about what authors need to know specifically about alt text and accessibility. So what we're going to cover is the basics of what is alt text and why it matters to you. We're going to go over some tips and tricks for writing effective alt text because it may not be what you would think it is. And then I'm going to give you a demonstration about how you can use alt text and actually create it in your Atticus book. At the end of this, I do have some frequently asked questions. About a week ago, I sent out an email to all Atticus authors saying, send me your questions, and I have included the answers to those in the end of this webinar today. So let's start with the basics, though. Let's talk about what is alt text and why does it matter right now. Alt text is short for alternative text, and this is very brief, very specific and meaningful descriptions of an image, and it's designed for readers who can't see it, so visually impaired readers. These are people who are going to be reading your book using an e-reading device of some sort, so not your print books, obviously, but your digital books. And this includes anything from screen readers to people who maybe are reading their ebooks with the images turned off on their tablet, for example, or anybody who is using accessible e-readers. Alt text is always critical for accessibility of your books to the visually impaired audience and readers. But more so than ever, it's now required for any author who is selling their books into the European market. So as of June 28th, 2025, it is now required that you meet the standards of the European Accessibility Act. So if you are selling into Europe, you do need to have alt text in your book for the correct type of images. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. So I want to talk now about writing effective alt text because this is really where it matters. I'm going to pare it down and give you some really simple rules. And the first one is that you will only want to use alt text if the image you're showing in your book adds new or necessary information. And I will elaborate on all of these in just a minute. But basically, you want to skip alt text if ever your image is decorative or if it's explained elsewhere on the page. Let's go a little bit deeper into this. Quick note for you, though. You do need to keep this short, and I'm going to show you how you can do this effectively. But we're talking about 140 characters is the Amazon maximum. And there are some publishers out there who actually limit it to 125 characters. So if you can stay under that goal, that's even better. So let's look at some good versus bad alt text. Now, these are, of course, the extreme words, but basically to give you an idea, good alt text is always going to answer just one very simple question. Why is the image here, and what does the reader need to know about it? We are not talking about a caption. This is not a full explanation of what every little detail of the image is. And it's never going to be a place where you need to sneak in symbolism or some sort of emotional interpretation if that's what you feel your image is giving to the context of your book. You want to keep it very simple. What does the reader need to know if they cannot see the image? So here are some examples. If you have a map of France showing World War II battle sites, that's all you need to say. Perhaps you have a photograph of an author speaking at a 2023 book launch. Again, that's all you need to say. You don't need to describe the details in full, just give the very basic context. If you have a hand-drawn sketch of a Victorian teacup with floral detailing, you can let your readers know, again, in very clear, concise terms. Another note here is that you do not have to include this as an image of. You don't have to include that in your alt text. That is assumed, and you don't need to waste your word counts or character counts on those details. So now let's talk about using alt text in Atticus and how you can actually apply it. There are specific locations inside Atticus where you have the option to apply alt text. First of all, you have inline images in your chapters. This is any image that you have inserted as a picture into the body content of a chapter or a page. Once you have an image there, you will now see the alt text option for you to add it there. Full page images will also give you the option to have alt text, and we do have more specific context for this during the frequently asked questions at the end as well, but you can add alt text to full page images. And then your chapter header images, only if you are using individual chapter header images. So if you have set up your Atticus theme and you use the exact same picture for all of your chapters, clearly that image is not giving any important contextual information that the reader absolutely needs to know about because it's just a repetitive image. It is considered decorative. However, if you have chosen to not use the Atticus chapter title, for example, but rather you have an image with your chapter number or chapter title, and you use that as individual chapter images, you can add alt text for that so that the reader gets chapter 1, chapter 2, that sort of idea. So after you have uploaded an image in any of these locations, you can edit that image and the alt text input field is going to be there. In just a minute, I'm going to jump you into Atticus and show you a demonstration as well. Here's another note. So we already have learned that you have a strict character count limit of 140, preferably 125 characters. You don't need to include image of in your alt text. You are also not going to want to include any punctuation that you wouldn't say out loud if you were reading it. For example, straight quotes, angled brackets, anything that wouldn't be read out loud, it would just be implied. You don't want to include that in your alt text. And again, just a reminder to keep it clean and concise. So let's jump into a demonstration. And please ignore my title because apparently I need spell check. I'm going to jump into Atticus here. This is a regular book. You've probably seen this in my tutorials before, but I'm going to show you all the different locations that you can add your alt text. So the first one we talked about was an inline chapter image. So again, this is an image that I have inserted into a chapter. If I come up here to the gear icon, you can see I now have this location where I can put the alt text. And all I've put in for this particular image is little dog ready, looking up at big yellow dog. Again, short and concise. And you will have that for your basic alt text. I also mentioned you can add it to a full page image. So I've got a full page image here. And once it is uploaded, the alt text option will show up. So this is a map to Reddy's house. Now, a few things I want to note on here. Remember how I said you shouldn't use punctuation? Atticus doesn't even give you the option. In proper grammar and written English, Reddy's house would have an apostrophe S. That is not required in this, so it has just removed the punctuation. It's just not included. However, this alt text is actually not required for this image because I have it in the full page image title. So if you have alt text, or if you have the context for the image written on the page elsewhere, you do not also have to put it as alt text. So if you have it as your chapter title, which a screen reader would be able to read, you do not have to add it as alt text. But you can see as it is, you can add the alt text to a full page image. Now, the other place that I said you can use alt text is in an individual chapter image. So in this theme, I do not have individual chapter images set up, but you can see how you would have it. So with individual chapter images, you add them right beside your chapter title. You can select the image from your image gallery or upload the image. Let's just use this little guy here. Once the image is uploaded, you can add your alt text to that image. If there's no image there, it will not have the option. So you do have to upload your image first and make sure it is loaded before the alt text input field will show up. And there's the alt text. Now, anywhere in Atticus that you can add alt text, you will see there is a little informational icon. And this gives you more details about when and how to write alt text, just in case you forget or you're not quite sure. But there is also a link to learn more about alt text best practices. So we have done as much as we can to set you up for success, and we've created 2 tutorials for you. So now if I jump into the Atticus tutorials webpage, this is just atticus.io/tutorials, you can scroll down, and under the writing section, we now have a new tutorial for adding alt text to images using Atticus. And this is going to show you where in Atticus and how you can do it if you forget at any point. And if you go down to tips and tricks, there is also another tutorial for accessible ebooks, how to write good alt text. So I'm going to quickly go over both of these with you. So this is the tips and tricks email. A lot of it is what I've already covered in this webinar, but you can use it as reference form. So this will go over exactly when and how to use alt text and also when not to add alt text. This is very important for you to understand that alt text is not designed for the mass visually, like your average reader who's reading the print book and can see their screen. This is very specifically designed for visually impaired readers, and there is a system that has been designed by the proper authorities and has been tested extensively, and every visually impaired reader on their e-reading devices are going to be expecting the same style of alt text. So you want to be sure that you follow these rules because it's really about the visually impaired reader and what they need. And so again, you don't want to use it as just a place for you to stuff keywords thinking this might help you with search engine optimization or impart special wisdom about the symbolization of your image or anything like that. You want it very clear and concise and not get experimental with your alt text. So this page walks you through exactly what to do and how to write or not write your alt text. The tutorial for how to use it in Atticus just shows you, as I just walked through the demo, all the different places that you can add alt text and how to get it showing. If you open up your Atticus and you're not seeing these alt text options, you may just want to do a log out, log in, hard refresh. If you have any troubles, write into our support team and we'll take care of you and make sure that this gets refreshed into your account. At the bottom of this tutorial, there's something quite fun as well and really helpful. This is a decision tree. So if you're still not quite sure how to write the text or if you need the alt text, you can come to this decision tree and it just takes you step by step through the questions you need to ask yourself. So step 1, does this image contain text? Yes or no? And then follow the instructions. Is this image part of a link? Yes or no? So you can experiment with this page. This is the alt text to images using Atticus. And once again, you can find that one under the writing section on our tutorials page. So that was the quick demonstration part. I do have some frequently asked questions that I'm going to keep going on. So these were written in before the webinar, and most questions, a whole bunch of people asked the very same thing. So we've collected them together and we'll answer them all. There may be a bit of variety if you submitted a question in how it's phrased, but this is the basic idea. So the first most popular question was, what about full page images, specifically title page art? So I mentioned quickly, but if your image contains any sort of important info that isn't replicated in the text elsewhere, so if you don't actually write it out in the text content, for an example, I've used a stylized quote or emblem, then yes, you do want to use alt text. So if a full page image isn't explained elsewhere, do use alt text. Otherwise, if it's just a purely decorative image, or if the information is included elsewhere, then you can skip the alt text. So when I say if the information is included elsewhere, this means if it's part of a chapter, if you've written something about the image in the text of the chapter, you don't need to include alt text. But if you are using a title page and the reader has just opened your book and they've already got the book's metadata, so they know your book title, they know the author name, they know all these details, and your title page is just restating them, you don't need to use alt text for that image. I also had a lot of people asking about book covers, specifically in the back matter. So a book cover, the cover of your book, you do not use alt text for because there is metadata that the screen readers and accessible devices will have access to. So you don't need alt text for the book cover of your book. But if you have an also by page, and you've included book covers there to send the reader on to another book in your archive or backlog, then it depends on how you've included that image. If the image itself is a clickable link, you do want to use alt text in order to say this is a link to, and then you can give the book title. If it is just a visual reference and you have the book's title on the page elsewhere and the link is in the text itself, you do not need to use alt text because then the image of the book cover is just superfluous, repeated information. The important information is actually on the page itself, so you don't need to use alt text. We had quite a few people write in asking about hand-drawn illustrations and whether there's a difference if you created the art or if you hired the art out or if it is stock art. It really doesn't matter where the image came from. That this is not a place where you're trying to attribute to the designer or person who took the photograph. It is exclusively for the benefit of visually impaired readers. So again, you don't need to describe every single detail of the illustration or photograph, but you want to ask yourself, if someone can't see this picture, what would they miss that's essential to the story or the content on the page? And then describe that. So the example we've used here is a black cat hiding under a weathered bookshelf. You don't need to talk about the coffee cup that's sitting on a table or the vase of flowers that's on the bookshelf, just the pertinent information that someone who cannot see the image would miss otherwise. And again, this is just a reminder, this is not an art critique. It's not a place for you to tell your readers what the theme or tone or symbolism of this image is suggesting. It is only a description of the image itself. Now, there were also a lot of questions about children's books. So children's books are almost always delivered to the reader as a fixed layout EPUB. If you are using Atticus, they're not necessarily considered fixed layout, but the text and illustrations form like one cohesive visual experience. The regulations understand that alt text is not going to be the same in every circumstance. And per the current standards, they don't currently expect children's picture book authors to include traditional art alt text. Now, if you would like to use alt text, specifically in children's pictures books that maybe have a picture and their text is separated, so they're two separate pages, and the text itself is on a page that a screen reader would be able to read, then in that circumstance, it would be a great idea to add alt text to the image so that the reader can get somewhat of an experience of what that picture might be. But the crucial element is the text itself. So if your text is embedded in the image, that book itself is not going to be super accessible, and not everything is made for everybody. So you'll have to use your judgment a little bit. I also want to make a disclaimer at this point that at Atticus, we are not lawyers. Nothing that you hear in this webinar or in our tutorial should be considered legal advice. So if you're really not quite sure and you are selling into the European market and this is a big deal for you, you may want to do your own research and make sure that you are getting everything exactly correct. We had quite a few people mentioning that they have used a short poem or a verse of scripture or a quotation, and they've turned that into an image and put it into a chapter or a full page image in their book. If this quote or poem is not included on the page elsewhere, you will want to use alt text to include the actual quote itself. So the example here is if you're quoting a Bible scripture, you would say the scripture number and then include the alt text. However, as previously mentioned, there is a very hard line where you can only use 140 characters. So if you have a really long quote, it would be a very good idea for you to have it in actual text on the page rather than in an image, so that it can be read by screen readers instead of skipped over with an image. So something to consider there. Now, there are also some questions that maybe you guys didn't write in to ask, but I think it would be important to have just a quick understanding of. This is one of them. So screen readers or screen readers will read image captions and alt text separately, but not together. So captions you have more range with, those are considered visual text. So they would be on the page text, and your screen reader is just going to read it as if it was reading the content of your chapter. Alt text is only going to appear if you've included it in the image, and it will only be read by screen readers. It doesn't appear on the page itself. So it's not on page text, and it will be written into, or it will be read into separate sentences by screen readers. So if you have the exact same information in the caption as you were planning to put in the alt text, you do not need to use alt text because that caption is considered on the page text. So if you're wondering what happens if I do it wrong, what if I leave an alt text blank and I actually should have included it? So it is possible that this could result in an accessibility error if your ebook is being published on an EU platform, a European platform. It might not pass the validation there. And if that is the case, they will just return it to you, ask you to include the alt text, and then you would add that and resubmit. We also had a lot of authors a little bit worried that the deadline for compliance is the 28th of June, which has already come and gone. And what if you have a back catalog of 100 books? These regulations only apply to books published after that date. As of now, the standards do allow for up to the year 2030 before you have to have your entire catalog updated. And again, these are only the books going into Europe at the moment. However, accessibility standards are really for everyone. Every reader should have similar access to your book. So even if you're only publishing into the US market, there are a lot of visually impaired readers in the US or Canada or Australia or in Asian countries and everywhere in the world. So you may want to consider updating your books now that the option is available to you in Atticus, and then you can just export some fresh copies. But you do have until 2030 to get your back catalog re-uploaded for sale in Europe. It's just any new book that is being published. Does Amazon check for compliance? As of right now, Amazon does follow the basic accessibility guidelines. As mentioned, their restriction is 140. Some publishing platforms restrict you to 125 characters. If you go over that amount in your alt text, or if you misuse punctuation. Again, remember I said you don't need to use punctuation because it wouldn't be said out loud. They may give you, again, export issues. They would send you an error or accessibility warning, and then you could update it. This is a very new feature. So currently there aren't a lot of anecdotal situations where people have said, oh, this has happened to me. So it will be probably an ever-changing experience, especially with Amazon. they update their policies as things turn up. So do expect some changes over time, but as of now, this is how it is working. And then again, we went over this, but if you're quite unsure still when and where to use alt text, here's a quick just process. Again, go back and check out those tutorials, but this is what you basically want to ask yourself. First of all, does the image share new information? If it does, then you can add some clean and concise alt text. Is it purely decorative, or is it explained in nearby text? If that's the case, then you're going to want to skip it. So you may have noticed that I didn't say you can add alt text to a scene break image, for example. That is considered entirely decorative. It is not something, it's something that goes throughout your entire book. It's the same image every time. It's decorative, does not require alt text. If the image is part of a button or a link, then you will always want to use alt text to explain the function of that link or button. So hopefully just those three quick kind of run through questions in your mind, you'll get the hang of this a lot quicker. It may sound a little intimidating to get to start, but if you're ever in doubt, just ask yourself, what would a blind reader absolutely need to know about this image? And remind yourself that you're not asking what might they find visually interesting. That's not what it's about. So to recap this webinar, you want to use your alt text sparingly, but very purposefully. You want to keep it under 125 characters if you can, but 140 is optional. And then you don't want to describe every images, just the ones that absolutely need it when you go through those questions. So that is the end of this particular presentation. I hope that this was helpful for everyone and you know a little bit more about alt text. As I mentioned, if you have any questions that were not answered in this webinar, please do write into support@atticus.io. Our team will be very happy to get back to you. And there will be a replay. We will include it on our website in probably the tutorials page as soon as this event is over, so you can come back and watch this as needed. I hope you are having a wonderful day and doing great things with your books. I wish you all the best with your alt text, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Take care, everyone.